The air in the French Alps, usually crisp and clean, now carried the metallic tang of disturbed earth and something older, something that had been hidden for 82 long years. A landslide, a scar ripped across the mountainside by relentless rain, had finally surrendered its secret. What the fourth crew unearthed was not just a plane, but a tomb. The mangled, earthen config of the P-51 Mustang, impossibly preserved the ravine at defied rational proximity to any known unfulfilled path. Nestled amongst the twisted metal, amidst the grim silence of the mountain, lay the skeletal remains of a man who had vanished into history's maw on August 17, 1943. The discovery site, miles from where First Lieutenant Arthur R. Henderson was supposed to be, was a chilling testament to a journey that had ended in perpetual twilight, a journey so profoundly misplaced it defied explanation. The scene was one of stark, brutal revelation, a silent scream from the past in a place that should have known only the wind. First Lieutenant Arthur R. Henderson, a name that had become synonymous with the silent ache of the missing, had disappeared nearly a century ago during the brutal throes of World War II. He was a fighter pilot, a young man of 24, known for his quiet competence and a resolve that masked a deeper yearning for home, for his wife Eleanor and their infant son, David. On that fateful day in 1943, Art was on a critical mission deep behind enemy lines. He reported success, but also damage to his P-51. Separated from his squadron by a maelstrom of adverse weather and mechanical failure, his last confirmed sighting was of a lone aircraft descending, desperately seeking its way back to Allied territory. But he never arrived. No communication followed. No wreckage was ever found. It was as if the sky had simply swallowed him whole. What made his disappearance so utterly inexplicable, so maddeningly impossible, was the absolute void left behind. No fuselage, no scattered parts, not even a whisper on the radio beyond his initial report. It was as if he had never existed. Now, 82 years later, the recovered aircraft and its pilot offered not solace but a far more disturbing truth than anyone had dared to imagine. The plane itself, Art's P-51, bore partial markings meticulously pieced together by U.S. military historical recovery specialists, confirming what the skeletal remains in a tarnished locket containing Eleanor's hair seemed to whisper. This is indeed Art Henderson. But his final resting place, so far from his presumed return route, suggested a desperate, agonizing deviation. The preservation was remarkable, almost spectral, hinting at more than just a swift end. It promised to reveal the horrifying details of his final moments, a tale of unimaginable struggle against the forces of nature and mechanical failure, and perhaps, a chilling testament to a courage fueled by love. Art had dreamed of returning to his farm, of watching his son grow, of a life reclaimed from the ashes of war. He was more than just a pilot. He was a husband, a father, a son of the American heartland. His wife, Eleanor, had spent a lifetime wrestling with the agony of not knowing, her hope a fragile thread woven through decades of silence. Their son, David, had grown up with the ghost of a father known only through faded photographs and whispered stories. The discovery of Art's personal effects, a worn leather flight jacket, a photograph of his family, a locket brought a visceral wave of grief and a semblance of closure to his surviving descendants, his 82-year-old grandson Mark among them. Their pain, once a void of uncertainty, was now a profound sorrow tinged with the awe of Art's final, valiant fight for life, a fight he waged for them. This is not just another missing plane story. It is an epic of survival, a descent into a horror that lay buried for generations, now unearthed by the very earth that concealed it. We are about to witness the final testament of a fighter pilot lost for over 8 decades. What happened to Art Henderson, and why was his plane hidden so deceitfully by the French Alps? Join us as we unravel the shocking truth. Where are you watching from to hear this incredible story? The answers are coming, and they are more disturbing than any of us could have ever predicted. First Lieutenant Arthur Art Henderson, the name, now etched onto a polished stone at a quiet American cemetery, belied the tempest of his final days. At 24, Art possessed a stillness that drew people in, a quiet strength that seemed to anchor him amidst the roaring chaos of war. His eyes, the shade of a summer sky just before dawn, held a depth that hinted at dreams far removed from the smoke and fury of the European front. His sandy brown hair, always neatly trimmed, framed a face that was earnest and open, unmarred by the cynicism that war often etched onto younger men. He stood at an average height, but in his worn leather flight jacket, creased from countless hours in the cockpit, he possessed an undeniable presence. Art was the epitome of the farm boy called to duty, his hands calloused from tractor work now deft on the controls of a P-51 Mustang. One particular memory of the particular reveals a rare woman of nowhere, instead of only the spread Art alone of the airfield, 15 failure, 100 of farmers, the faint about bankruptcy, the flavors of He was, by all accounts, a beacon of quiet integrity in a world spiraling into darkness. Art's days were a rhythm of controlled intensity. Pre-dawn reveille was followed by a hearty, no-nonsense breakfast in the mess hall, where the clatter of silverware mingled with hushed conversations about upcoming missions. Then came flight preparations, meticulous checks of his Mustang, affectionately nicknamed Prairie Star, the scent of oil and avgas a familiar perfume. Briefings were sharp, packed with vital intelligence, maps, and enemy positions. He often shared a quiet nod with his wingman, Sergeant Jack Riley, a gruff optimist who'd seen more combat but admired Art's unwavering focus. The hours in the sky were a blur of adrenaline, precision, and an omnipresent awareness of mortality. Upon returning, whether victorious or battered, there was debriefing, equipment maintenance, and then the rare, precious downtime. He'd write letters to Eleanor, his wife, the ink often smudged by sweat or grease, his words a lifeline to the life he fought to protect. His personal ritual was simple. Before sleep, he'd trace the worn edges of a photograph of Eleanor and their infant son, David, murmuring their names like a prayer. The men in his squadron often remarked how Art, despite the danger, never seemed reckless. He was always precise, always prepared, making his disappearance all the more baffling. Art's character was a tapestry woven with quiet resilience and a profound sense of duty. He wasn't one for grand pronouncements, his actions speaking far louder. Sergeant Riley recalled an instance where another pilot, shaken by a near miss, was on the verge of cracking. Art, without fanfare, simply sat with him, sharing a flask of lukewarm coffee and talking about the quiet beauty of their Midwestern fields, a silent reassurance that grounded the man. Eleanor, in letters unearthed years later, described him as her rock, her calm in the storm of her own anxieties about his service. He possessed an unshakable moral compass, believing in the righteousness of their cause but never shying away from the human cost. He was fiercely loyal to his family, his love for Eleanor and David a tangible force that motivated him. He prioritized honesty, even when it was inconvenient, and approached every task from cleaning his rifle to flying a dangerous mission with the same meticulous dedication. His quiet competence was not mere skill, it was a manifest expression of deeply held values. The future for Art was painted in vivid, homely hues. He dreamed of returning to their small farm, of the familiar smell of turned earth after a spring rain, of teaching David how to tend the crops. He'd speak of building a treehouse for David, of planting Eleanor's favorite rose bushes by their porch, of quiet evenings spent reading by the fire. He promised Eleanor a honeymoon trip to the Pacific coast once the war was over, a dream they'd meticulously saved for. His responsibilities were a constant anchor. Eleanor, his beloved wife, and David, his son, so small and innocent, depending entirely on his return. He carried their well-being in his heart as much as he navigated his P-51 through treacherous skies. These weren't just vague hopes, they were concrete, planned futures, etched into his mind and often into the margins of his logbooks. He had a deep, abiding sense of commitment, a promise made not just with words, but with his entire being. The enigma of Arthur Henderson's disappearance lies precisely in this profound groundedness. He was not a man prone to impulse or recklessness. His life was meticulously constructed around duty, love, and the promise of a future with his family. There was no trace of despair, no hint of a desire to escape the war or his commitments. His entire existence, up to that fateful August day, pointed towards a man desperately striving to return home, not to vanish from it. The thought of him abandoning Eleanor and the infant David is as alien as the idea of the sun rising in the west. His character, his actions, his deeply rooted ties to his family and his home all conspired to make his vanishing act a desperate, inconceivable act. He was a man tethered to life with unbreakable bonds, making his ultimate fate, in the impossible hiding place of his aircraft, a mystery that pierced the very heart of those who knew him. The air base at Saint-Jean-de-Luz, France, in August 1943, was less a town and more a sprawling, temporary scar carved into the Basque Coast's emerald landscape. Its utilitarian barracks, a patchwork of prefabricated structures huddled close to cavernous hangars that dwarfed the surrounding fields of wheat and corn. The dusty access road mimicked the churned earth of landing strips, a constant gray ribbon against the vibrant greens and blues of the Pyrenees foothills that loomed in the distance, their peaks often shrouded in a mist that lent the region an ethereal, almost wistful quality. Beyond the barbed wire and sentry posts, the Atlantic Ocean met the rugged shoreline with a persistent, rhythmic crash, a constant, lulling symphony that masked the underlying tension of war. This was a place defined by transient purpose, a hub of roaring engines, shouted commands, and the ever-present scent of aviation fuel, mingled with the salty tang of the sea and the wild, herbaceous aroma of the coastal scrub. Life here unfolded with an anxious urgency, a hurried yet precise ballet performed against a backdrop that, for all its natural beauty, was a carefully controlled zone of imminent danger. Summer in 1943 was a season of oppressive heat, punctuated by the jarring roar of engines and the low hum of anticipation that permeated the air base at Saint-Jean-de-Luz. This was the European theater, and for First Lieutenant Arthur Henderson, the world was reduced to the cramped confines of his P-51 Mustang, baptized Prairie Star. The social fabric was woven from the shared anxieties and camaraderie of men facing extraordinary pressures. Pilots like Art, Sergeant Jack Riley, and their wingmen formed tight-knit units, their relationships forged in the white heat of combat training and the shared, unspoken fear of the air. Off base, the local French populace remained a cautious presence, often wary but sometimes offering clandestine supplies or a quiet haven for those on leave. Technology was a lifeline. Crackling radio communications, maps with meticulously plotted routes, and the sophisticated but vulnerable machinery of war. Everyday life for the airman was dictated by the clock and the mission log, a rhythm of pre-dawn reveille, engine run-ups, briefing rooms buzzing with intelligence, and the terrifying, exhilarating blur of sortie. It was a world where a letter from home, or a well-worn photograph, held the weight of a kingdom. The community at St. Jean-de-Luz was a transient one, bound by the shared purpose of the war. Art Henderson, with his quiet demeanor and unwavering focus, was a cornerstone, a steady presence amidst the storm. He fit into the community not through boisterous camaraderie, but through his dependable competence and the subtle strength he exuded. Sergeant Riley, a man who wore his cynicism like a shield, often sought Art's counsel, their conversations typically occurring over lukewarm coffee in the mess hall or during post-flight debriefs. Captain Miller, their commanding officer, moved through the base like a shadow, his face etched with the perpetual worry of those responsible for young lives. The base maintained a routine vigilance. Patrols were constant, communications encrypted, and any deviation from protocol was met with swift correction. While the local French villagers were largely invisible, their lives running on parallel traits of occupation and resistance, the airmen were keenly aware of the land around them, its hidden paths and secluded valleys, places that could offer both refuge and peril. The very landscape that cradled the air base at St. Jean-de-Luz held an inherent duality, a place of breathtaking beauty that also harbored unseen dangers. The proximity to the Pyrenees meant navigating unpredictable weather patterns, sudden squalls that could descend from the peaks with alarming speed, twisting winds that played havoc with aircraft navigation. The dense forests that carpeted the lower slopes offered natural concealment, a perfect place for unseen threats to lie in wait, or for a lost pilot to disappear without a trace. Art's mission on August 17, 1943 had been to penetrate deep behind enemy lines, a journey that would take him through territories where Allied presence was negligible. The ever-present threat wasn't just the enemy's guns, but the unpredictable forces of nature, the mechanical frailties of complex machines, and the sheer disorientation that could befall a pilot separated from his unit. This picturesque coastline, while offering a beautiful respite from the grime of battle, was a place where one wrong turn, one mechanical hiccup, could lead to an irreversible descent into oblivion. The meticulous preparation for each mission painted a stark contrast to the potential chaos that lurked beyond the base perimeter. Art's pre-flight checks of the Prairie Star were legendary for their thoroughness, born from a deep-seated desire to ensure his safe return, to keep the promise of home alive. The routine of engine warm-up, the brief, reassuring pat on the fuselage, the deep breath before climbing into the cockpit. These were practiced rituals, anchors in a life defined by uncertainty. He would often pause, just for a moment, before taxiing, his gaze drifting toward the distant horizon, a silent communion with the life he was fighting to protect. The day of August 17, 1943, dawned much like any other, bright and deceptively calm. The air was still, the mist clinging to the distant peaks, holding its breath. The routine was in motion, every man in his place, every machine ready. It was the calm before the inevitable storm, the moment when the carefully constructed normalcy of the air base would splinter and the landscape, so beautiful and so vast, would become the silent witness to a profound and enduring mystery. The dawn of August 17, 1943, broke with a deceptive gentleness over the French landscape. At 5:17 a.m., First Lieutenant Arthur Art Henderson stirred in his cot in the barracks at St. Jean-de-Luz. The air, still cool from the night, carried the faint, familiar scent of gasoline and damp earth. He stretched, his lanky frame unfolding from sleep, and paused for a moment, a flicker of unease quickly suppressed, touching his mind. It wasn't a premonition, just a whisper of the immense weight of his responsibilities. Outside, the first stirrings of a busy day began, the distant churn of a generator, the muffled clang of equipment being moved. Nothing in the pre-dawn quiet suggested this day would be anything other than a repetition of countless others, a sequence of duties to be performed before returning, as always, to thoughts of Eleanor and baby David. By 6:03 a.m., Art was already in the mess hall, the aroma of coffee and fried eggs thick in the air. He sat with Sergeant Jack Riley, his wingman, who was nursing a chipped mug of lukewarm coffee. "Morning, Art," Riley grunted, his usual gruffness softened by the early hour. "Big day ahead, eh?" Art nodded, a faint smile touching his lips as he scanned a worn photograph of Eleanor and David, tucked carefully inside his flight jacket pocket. He took a measured bite of his breakfast, the mundane act of eating a comforting anchor. Had chosen his favorite flight suit, the one with the reinforced knees, and the leather of his jacket felt familiar and reassuring as he adjusted it. His last conversation was with Riley, a brief exchange about the mission's objective, the usual chatter about enemy dispositions and potential flak concentrations. There was a pact of unspoken understanding, a shared bravery that bonded them. At 8:45 a.m., Captain Miller's briefing commenced. Art absorbed the intelligence reports, his gaze sharp as he studied the maps laid out on the table. His P-51, affectionately nicknamed Prairie Star, was already being prepped by the ground crew, a symphony of mechanical tuning that was Art's daily soundtrack. He exchanged a quick nod with Riley, a silent acknowledgement of their shared flight plan for the day. The mission, deep into occupied territory, was critical. At 10:23 a.m., Art performed his final pre-flight checks, running his gloved hand over the polished metal of the cockpit. Everything was as it should be. He paused for a moment, his eyes drifting toward the distant, mist-shrouded peaks of the Pyrenees. He breathed deeply, the scent of avgas filling his lungs one last time. He offered a brief, reassuring wave to a nearby ground crewman. At 11:05 a.m. precisely, the Prairie Star, along with its formation, roared down the runway. Art's last confirmed observation came at 11:58 a.m. as he reported neutralizing his target, a German radio relay station, and noted minor damage to his aircraft. His voice on the radio was steady, professional, betraying no undue alarm. His wingman Riley confirmed seeing Art trailing slightly, maneuvering lower than the rest of the formation due to the reported issues. The weather, which had been stable, was beginning to turn, a gray blanket descending from the mountains. This was the last anyone heard from First Lieutenant Arthur Henderson. His flight was expected back at the base by 1:30 p.m., a scheduled debriefing waiting. As the hours ticked past, the gnawing unease began to set in, a dark cloud gathering on the horizon of their certainty. By 4:00 p.m., when no word had come and no aircraft had landed, the unthinkable began to dawn. Art Henderson was missing. The air base at Saint-Jean-de-Luz, accustomed to the routine anxieties of war, found itself grappling with a void that grew with each passing hour. As the scheduled 1:30 p.m. debriefing for First Lieutenant Arthur R. Henderson approached and passed without his return, a subtle shift occurred. Captain Miller, a man who wore the weight of command like a shroud, initially clung to precedent. Adverse weather, a mechanical issue, he repeated, his voice betraying a forced calm as he spoke to Sergeant Jack Riley, Art's wingman, at 2:00 p.m. Hell, file a delayed report. Battery must be dead on the comms. Riley, however, felt a cold dread coiling in his gut, a premonition born from 8 years of flight. Had seen Art maneuvering lower, fighting something. By 3:00 p.m., the casual concern had solidified into a gnawing anxiety. Riley pressed Captain Miller for a reconnaissance flight, a low-level sweep of Art's projected return path. Miller, though reluctant to divert resources, couldn't ignore the unease mirrored in his own gut. He agreed, but the search grid was already vast, mirroring Art's supposed flight path over a treacherous stretch of mountains known for its rapid weather changes. By 5:00 p.m., the radio silence persisted, a stark, deafening testament to Art's absence. The hope of a delayed report had evaporated, replaced by the chilling certainty that something was terribly wrong. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, ominous shadows, and the base, usually buzzing with post-mission activity, fell into an anxious quiet. It was then that concern tipped irrevocably into panic. At 6:17 p.m. on August 17, 1943, Sergeant Riley, his face grim, placed the first official call to the base operations desk. "This is Sergeant Riley, requesting immediate confirmation of LT Henderson's status. His flight was due back hours ago. No radio contact since his last transmission about minor damage. I'm telling you, Captain, it's not like Art to go dark like this." The dispatcher, a young corporal named Thompson, sounded weary, the late hour thinning his patience. "Sergeant, we logged him as overdue. They dispatch a sweep, standard procedure, give it a few hours." Riley's voice was sharp, cutting through the weary bureaucracy. "A few hours? Sir, this is LT Henderson. He's meticulous. He wouldn't just go missing. He's either in deep trouble or he's down. We need more than just overdue on a report. He was flying through bad weather, reported damage. The possibility of a forced landing or worse is high." He detailed Art's appearance, his flight suit, the nickname of his aircraft, Prairie Star, and recited the last known coordinates of his transmission. Thompson's tone shifted, the ingrained caution of protocol warring with the palpable urgency in Riley's voice. "Sir, I'll relay the information immediately. Captain Miller is already coordinating initial efforts. The call ended, leaving Riley standing in the fading light, the heavy silence amplifying his dread. The implications of Art Henderson's disappearance were immediately apparent to Captain Miller. He understood that a single pilot lost in combat was a grim reality, but the absolute lack of any traceable wreckage, even after several hours of focused searching by a support plane, shifted the paradigm. By 8:00 p.m., a formal investigation was underway. Lieutenant Davies, a sharp, methodical officer with a reputation for thoroughness, was assigned as the lead investigator. Davies initiated a detailed timeline, cross-referencing Art's last known position with weather reports and enemy activity in the area. His first interviews were with Riley and other pilots who had flown with Art, charting their interactions, gathering any subtle nuances of his demeanor in the days leading up to his disappearance. The initial search expanded beyond the immediate return route, encompassing a wider swath of contested territory, acknowledging the possibility of Art being forced to deviate dramatically. Theories were cautiously logged: crash due to enemy fire, catastrophic mechanical failure leading to an unsurvivable impact, or, the least palatable but ever-present, capture. The starkest piece of evidence, or rather the lack thereof, was the complete absence of any debris, no scattered aluminum, no oil slick, not even a faint smoke plume. It was as if Art and the Prairie Star had simply ceased to exist. Within the first 24 hours, the case of Lt. Arthur Henderson had transitioned from a standard missing in action report to a classified investigation shrouded in mystery. Davies and his team meticulously scoured Art's quarters. Letters to Eleanor, meticulous logbooks, and personal effects were catalogued. A worn photograph of Eleanor and infant David, tucked into his flight jacket pocket, became a focal point, a silent testament to the life he fought to return to. Interviews with ground crew confirmed the thoroughness of his pre-flight checks, ruling out simple mechanical oversight. The first significant frustration emerged. There was simply no tangible evidence pointing to a cause. The search area, though vast, yielded nothing but dense forest and unforgiving terrain. The critical 48-hour window, the golden period for locating casualties or survivors, was rapidly closing. The prolonged silence and the baffling absence of wreckage began to fuel more speculative theories, including the possibility of a deliberate, unexplainable diversion or even a mid-air disintegration that scattered any trace over an impossibly wide area. The investigation faced an immediate wall of silence, both from enemy territory and the unforgiving French landscape. By the end of the second day, without any sign of Art or his P-51, the case had escalated from a tense operational concern to a full-blown, high-priority investigation. Captain Miller authorized the allocation of additional aerial reconnaissance resources, pushing the boundaries of available aircraft. The sheer lack of any discernible clue gnawed at Davies and his team. They had established a probable flight path, dissected Art's known movements, and interviewed every potential witness, yet the central question, what happened to Lt. Henderson, remained unanswered. The initial theories, while plausible, were hampered by a frustrating lack of corroborating evidence. The pressure mounted, not just from immediate military command, but also from the quiet, persistent hope held by Art's family back home, a hope that was slowly beginning to curdle into a profound and agonizing uncertainty. The case was far more complex than a simple wartime loss. It was a puzzle whose pieces seemed deliberately, impossibly, hidden. The disappearance of First Lieutenant Arthur Henderson sent ripples of alarm through the small, close-knit community surrounding the Saint-Jean-de-Luz Air Base. Within hours of him being declared overdue, the initial concern among his fellow pilots, particularly Sergeant Jack Riley, began to morph into a tangible urgency. Riley, haunted by the image of Art's Mustang veering off course in the deteriorating weather, was the first to galvanize support. He spoke with other pilots, ground crew, even mechanics who had worked on Prairie Star, canvassing for any detail, any hint of an anomaly. News spread like wildfire through the base grapevine. Soon, civilian volunteers, families of other personnel stationed there, and local villagers who had formed tentative bonds with the airmen started arriving at the base perimeter, offering their help. A makeshift command center was quickly established in the base's repurposed chapel, its quiet solemnity now a stark contrast to the anxious energy inside. Divers from the nearby naval contingent volunteered their expertise, their sleek, black wetsuits stowed ready for deployment. Mountaineers, familiar with the treacherous Pyrenean terrain Art's projected flight path had crossed, gathered their gear, their eyes scanning the distant peaks with a mixture of concern and grim determination. Cyclists, their bikes packed with emergency supplies, stood ready to scour remote trails impassable by conventional vehicles. The collective hope was a palpable force, a shared determination to locate one of their own. Captain Miller, under immense pressure, recognized the need to centralize and formalize these burgeoning efforts. The base operations room, usually a hub of organized to frantic activity, transformed into an official command center. Additional units began arriving. Floodlights illuminated the airfield as specialized K-9 units were brought in, their handlers working diligently to get scent samples. Helicopters, their rotors kicking up dust, were prepped for aerial sweeps, their crews receiving detailed briefings on the suspected flight path and potential crash zones. The French gendarmerie, initially handling local inquiries, now coordinated with military police and French Air Force units. Digital mapping technologies, rudimentary by today's standards but cutting-edge then, were employed to delineate search perimeters and identify potential landing sites or impact zones. Every available resource, from ground personnel to advanced aerial photography interpretation, was marshaled into a coordinated, systematic grid search. The sheer scale of the mobilization, the synchronized deployment of diverse forces, lent the operation an almost military precision, a well-oiled machine fueled by a singular, desperate objective. As the search intensified, so did the flickerings of hope, each immediately followed by crushing disappointment. A fragment of painted metal, discovered snagged on a high mountain ridge, sent a surge of adrenaline through the ground teams. It was dutifully collected, meticulously catalogued, and then agonizingly identified as belonging to a downed German aircraft from a previous skirmish. Days later, a local farmer reported seeing an unfamiliar aircraft making a hasty descent into a remote valley. Search parties converged on the location, their every step heavy with anticipation, only to find evidence of a recent, albeit minor, emergency landing by a reconnaissance plane that had managed to limp back to friendly territory. Conflicting, fragmented testimonies from other pilots offered little clarity, each recalling vague details of turbulence, reduced visibility, and Art's aircraft trailing behind. One pilot mentioned a strange, almost unnatural silence on Art's radio just before his final transmission, a detail that seemed significant but offered no immediate explanation. The pattern was established, a tantalizing clue, a surge of hope, followed by the cold, hard reality of another dead end. The sheer scale of the French landscape proved to be an overwhelming obstacle. The Pyrenees, while offering potential cover, were vast and unforgiving, a labyrinth of dense forests, steep gorges, and unpredictable weather patterns. The aerial search was constantly hampered by sudden fog banks or gale-force winds that descended from the peaks without warning, forcing helicopters to return to base and grounding fixed-wing reconnaissance. Technologically, the era offered limited capabilities for pinpointing wreckage in such difficult terrain. Ground crews toiled for hours in dense undergrowth, their progress agonizingly slow. The sheer number of volunteers, while a testament to community spirit, also presented logistical challenges, stretching communication lines and requiring careful assignment to avoid duplication of effort or, worse, dangerous overlap in hazardous areas. It became clear that the search area was exponentially larger than the available resources, especially when considering the uncertainty of Art's actual flight path deviation. Each passing day without a sign of Art or Prairie Star chipped away at the initial momentum, revealing the profound limitations of their efforts. As the days stretched into a week, the initial fervor began to wane, replaced by a creeping sense of exhaustion. The relentless cycle of hope followed by crushing disappointment had taken its toll on the volunteers. Many families, once eager to help, found themselves needing to return to their own responsibilities, their initial commitment strained by the prolonged absence of any definitive results. Discussions began to shift from immediate rescue to more long-term investigative strategies. The official budget allocated for the intensive search, initially robust, started to show signs of strain as fuel, personnel, and equipment costs mounted. Captain Miller and his command staff, while still dedicated, acknowledged the unsustainable nature of maintaining such a massive, multifaceted operation indefinitely. The grim realization on that this might not be a case of a few days' search, but potentially something far more complex entering, a mystery that might elude them for a long, long time, leading Guard Henderson to his fate headed in the very end of the swallowed hole. The active search for First Lieutenant Arthur Henderson, a flame that had burned with desperate urgency for weeks, was officially extinguished with a bureaucratic sigh. As the seasons turned, the airbase operations room, once a hive of frantic coordination, began to settle into a somber routine of processing outstanding reports. Captain Miller, his face etched with a weariness that no amount of sleep could assuage, signed the final dispatch ordering the official suspension of all active recovery efforts. The meticulously organized binders filled with aerial maps, witness statements, and futile grid searches were transferred from the bustling intelligence section to the quiet, dusty confines of the cold case archives. The vibrant energy that had fueled the initial mobilization dissipated, leaving behind a vacuum filled with the hushed finality of lost in action, presumed dead. Resources, always strained in wartime, were swiftly reallocated to more pressing operational needs, the personnel involved in the Henderson investigation reassigned to active combat or new assignments. The case, though officially closed as a certainty of death, remained a phantom presence, a chilling testament to a mystery that time refused to unearth on its own. Years bled into decades, each anniversary of Art's disappearance marked by quiet rituals that became both anchors and burdens for his family. Eleanor, her youthful hope gradually weathered by relentless uncertainty, would light a candle on August 17th, a silent vigil for the husband she barely knew. Their son, David, grew from a child whispering his father's name to a young man grappling with the void, his understanding of his father shaped by faded photographs and Eleanor's hushed stories. He learned to live with a grief that had no clear resolution, a suspended sorrow that amplified even the smallest of family triumphs with a bittersweet undertone. When Art's older sister, Clara, passed away, David inherited her meticulously kept scrapbooks filled with articles about other missing pilots and Eleanor's increasingly desperate correspondence with international committees, a tangible representation of a lifelong search. The family, though bound by their shared loss, also experienced the natural fragmentation of time. David married, had children, and his own life's demands sometimes pulled him away from the all-consuming mystery, a pragmatic desire to move forward clashing with the deep-seated, inherited grief. In the burgeoning digital age, Art's story found a new life, transforming from a personal tragedy into a captivating enigma for a global audience. Dedicated online forums sprang up, populated by aviation history enthusiasts, amateur sleuths, and those drawn to the melancholic allure of unexplained disappearances. Podcasts dissected every known detail, from the mission parameters to the vague weather reports, weaving intricate narratives of possible scenarios. Wild theories proliferated. Art had defected, he'd been captured and secretly interrogated, he'd experienced a bizarre mid-air explosion that left no trace. Conspiracy theories, too, took root, linking his disappearance to secret wartime experiments or espionage. While David, and later his son Mark, occasionally browsed these platforms, they found the often sensationalized speculation deeply unsettling, an invasion of their private pain. The constant public dissection of Art's fate, the reduction of his profound sacrifice to mere content, was a painful irony, turning a deeply personal search for closure into a spectacle. The emotional and financial toll of the unresolved mystery led Eleanor, and later David, to seek answers through private channels. Private investigators, their eyes sharp and their methods discreet, were hired and then dismissed as their leads evaporated like morning mist. David invested in early computer-aided historical mapping, attempting to recreate Art's flight path with newfound technological precision, but the lack of any concrete data proved insurmountable. There were consultations with psychics, who offered vague pronouncements of mountainous terrain and trapped spirits, each session a momentary flicker of hope followed by a crushing return to reality. Family meetings, once filled with shared hope, became strained discussions about the dwindling resources available for further private investigations, the emotional energy required to revisit the painful details of Art's disappearance a constant drain. Each avenue explored, each renewed effort, seemed to only deepen the confounding nature of his vanishing, reinforcing the perception that Art Henderson had indeed been swallowed whole by the earth. Over the decades, Arthur Henderson's story transitioned from a painful footnote in wartime history to a local legend surrounding the region of his last known operations. New generations of investigators occasionally reviewed the files, equipped with better technology or a fresh perspective, only to be thwarted by the same fundamental lack of evidence. A faint radio signal detected years later, initially raising hopes, was ultimately identified as a stray transmission from a distant reconnaissance plane. Occasional reports of unusual metal fragments found in remote wilderness areas would briefly reignite public interest, only to be debunked as geological anomalies or debris from other, later incidents. The mystery of the missing P-51 Mustang and its pilot became a permanent fixture in the landscape, not just on maps, but in the collective consciousness of those who lived in the shadow of such enduring, unanswered questions. The case had settled into a state of perpetual limbo, a story waiting for an impossible resolution. The biting wind, a constant companion in the remote reaches of the French Alps, whipped around Jean-Luc Dubois' face as he navigated his heavy-duty ATV along the newly carved path. The recent, unprecedented torrential rains had caused a devastating landslide, a gaping wound on the mountainside, rendering previously inaccessible terrain a treacherous, muddy chaos. Dubois, a seasoned forestry worker for over 2 decades, was part of the initial assessment team, tasked with surveying the damage and identifying any potential hazards. It was 9:17 a.m., and the air was still thick with the metallic tang of disturbed earth, a smell that both excited and unnerved him, hinting at secrets the mountain had finally been forced to yield. His objective today was routine: check for unstable slopes and assess the extent of the ecological disruption. As he rounded a particularly sharp bend, his headlights, cutting through the persistent mist clinging to the lower slopes, caught an impossible glint of something metallic, impossibly bright against the sodden earth. It wasn't natural rock or fallen timber. A jolt of curiosity, quickly followed by a prickle of unease, shot through him. Pulling the ATV to a halt, every instinct screaming caution, he dismounted, his heavy boots sinking into the thick, clinging mud. He approached the anomaly with a slow, deliberate tread, the silence of the mountains amplifying the pounding of his own heart. The glint resolved into a section of what looked like polished aluminum, impossibly smooth and out of place, protruding from the violently churned earth. The sheer scale of it, half buried deep within the ravine, suggested something monumental. His seasoned eyes, accustomed to the subtle signs of nature's wear and tear, widened in disbelief. This was no mere debris. This was the undeniable form of something manufactured, something from another time, brutally torn from its slumber. The metallic sheen was the first clue, but as Dubois carefully cleared away loose soil with his gloved hands, more visceral details began to emerge. Beneath the sleek aluminum skin, encrusted with 82 years of earth and grit, was a shape that sent a shiver down his spine. A wing, unmistakably the wing of an aircraft. The partial markings, though blurred by time and abrasion, were still discernible, a faded blue insignia with a white star within a circle. It was the unmistakable emblem of the United States Army Air Forces. Further exploration revealed more of the mangled fuselage, twisted metal contorted into unimaginable shapes as if a giant hand had crushed it. Nestled amongst the wreckage, protruding from the earth, was a section of what appeared to be a cockpit, its glass long shattered, but the framework eerily intact. It was here, amidst the twisted metal and the grim silence of the mountain, that Dubois' gaze fell upon something that made his blood run cold. The unmistakable, skeletal outline of a human form, impossibly preserved within the confines of the shattered cockpit. The bones, yellowed and brittle, were still arranged as if in a final, desperate attempt to control the falling machine. The state of preservation was astonishing, almost spectral, hinting at an end far too sudden to allow for the decay that time would normally inflict. Clutched loosely in a skeletal hand, almost hidden by the debris, was a small, tarnished metal object. When Dubois carefully unearthed it, the faint gleam of gold caught his eye. It was a locket, its surface scratched and worn, a silent testament to a life lived and lost. The disturbing significance of these findings, lying so impossibly far from any known flight path, was a weight that settled heavily upon him. The frigid mountain air seemed to hold its breath as Dubois, his hands shaking, fumbled for his satellite phone. The crackle of static was deafening in the sudden quiet. He dialed the local gendarmerie, his voice raspy, barely above a whisper. Gendarmerie, Dubois speaking, he choked out, the words tumbling over themselves. We have a discovery, a significant one up on the old landslide zone, the dispatcher. A calm, professional voice named Sergeant Morel responded. Dubois, ease up. What have you found? Dubois took a deep, ragged breath. It's an aircraft. A plane. I think it's military. And there's a pilot. Morel's tone instantly shifted from weary routine to immediate alert. An aircraft? Are you certain? Dubois' voice gained a desperate urgency. Yes, Sergeant. I'm certain. Buried deep. It looks very old. And the pilot, he's still there. The preservation is disturbing. Morel's professionalism honed in on the critical details. Stay where you are, Dubois. Do not disturb anything else. We're dispatching a unit. Can you give me exact coordinates? Dubois relayed the information, his eyes never leaving the somber tableau before him. Within 20 minutes, the distant wail of sirens muffled by the terrain grew louder. Uniformed officers, accompanied by forensic specialists, arrived, their initial skepticism melting into stunned silence as they surveyed the scene. The area was immediately cordoned off, a stark yellow tape dividing the living from the long dead. The fragile locket, carefully placed in an evidence bag, felt like a key, a tangible link to a ghost. Back at the gendarmerie headquarters in Bryanson, the news ricocheted through the usually sedate offices like an explosion. Sergeant Morel, replaying Dubois' call in his mind, felt a palpable tremor of historical significance. She immediately alerted Captain Dubois' French counterpart, Major Antoine Lefebvre, head of serious crimes. Lefebvre, a veteran investigator known for his meticulous approach, convened an emergency meeting. Files, long relegated to the dustbin of bureaucratic obscurity, were retrieved from the cold case division. The name Arthur Henderson, a ghost from a forgotten era, resurfaced. United States military historical recovery specialists were immediately contacted, their expertise crucial for identifying and repatriating wartime artifacts and personnel. The remote location of the discovery, miles from any known flight path of American aircraft in 1943, only deepened the enigma. The consensus formed quickly. This was not just a tragic accident, it was a profound historical puzzle that had lain buried for decades. Major Lefevre assigned his most trusted investigator, Lieutenant Isabelle Morel, no relation to the dispatcher, to lead the French contingent, working in tandem with the incoming American team. The air crackled with a renewed sense of purpose. A 50-year-old cold case, now 82 years old, was not just reopened, but violently thrust back into the light. The phone call to Mark Henderson's modest suburban home in Ohio was unexpected, the caller identification displaying an unfamiliar French number. Mark, a retired engineer, answered with a tired sigh, expecting a telemarketer. The clipped, formal French accent on the other end, struggling to convey the magnitude of their discovery, was initially baffling. When the words Lieutenant Arthur Henderson, aircraft recovery, and possible identification finally registered, a wave of disbelief washed over him. He sat down heavily, his wife, Sarah, looking over with a concerned frown. As the explanation unfolded, detailing the landslide, the plane, the pilot, and the locket, Mark's initial shock morphed into a maelstrom of emotions, a terrifying surge of hope tangled with a deep, primal fear of what new trauma this discovery might bring. News of the find spread like wildfire through the local community and then, through national media, igniting a mixture of solemn curiosity and renewed sorrow for a local boy lost to history. The fragmented reports, hinting at the extreme preservation and the bizarre location of the crash, suggested that the full truth about Art Henderson's final moments might be far more disturbing and far more profound than anyone had ever dared to imagine. For Mark, 82 years of not knowing were about to collide with 82 years of hidden horror. The discovery in the French Alps had shattered the decades-long silence surrounding First Lieutenant Arthur Henderson's disappearance, transforming a haunting enigma into an urgent, active investigation. Captain Dubois of the Gendarmerie, his face grim with the weight of the past and the potential future, convened an emergency meeting at the Bryanson headquarters. Seated around a large table, illuminated by holographic projections of topographical maps and historical aircraft data, were French forensic experts, U.S. military recovery specialists, and Lieutenant Isabelle Morel, the lead French investigator. The air crackled with a focused intensity, a stark contrast to the somber quiet that had enveloped the case file for so long. Modern aerial LiDAR scans overlaid the mountain's treacherous terrain, highlighting the precise location of the buried P-51, while advanced digital reconstructions of the P-51 Mustang provided a visual baseline for the wreckage analysis. A dedicated task force, codenamed Alpine Star, was officially formed, a confluence of international expertise and cutting-edge technology mobilized to provide definitive answers. The sheer, almost supernatural preservation of the aircraft and its pilot, coupled with its impossibly remote location, demanded the most rigorous scientific scrutiny. Every shred of data, from the initial discovery to decades-old mission logs, was being re-examined with an unprecedented level of detail, fueled by the certainty that this was their single, definitive opportunity to finally close the book on Art Henderson's fate. The urgency was palpable. The mountain had yielded its secret, and now the truth had to be meticulously unearthed. The painstaking forensic analysis commenced immediately, commencing with the delicate recovery of the pilot's remains and the aircraft's components from the deep ravine. U.S. Air Force forensic anthropologists, led by Dr. Evelyn Reed, worked in a cold, sterile mobile laboratory erected near the impact site, meticulously cataloging every fragment. DNA samples, extracted from bone marrow and teeth, were cross-referenced with databases, including lineage markers provided by Art Henderson's grandson, Mark. The initial match was overwhelmingly positive, confirming the pilot was indeed First Lieutenant Arthur Henderson. Simultaneously, metallurgists and aviation historians painstakingly analyzed the P-51's airframe. Microscopic examination of the fuselage revealed unique stress fractures and impact patterns, providing invaluable clues about the forces the aircraft endured. Temporal analysis of the embedded Earth layers, using sophisticated geological dating techniques, corroborated the 82-year timeline of the crash. Further examination of the cockpit revealed that the controls were jammed in a position suggesting Art was actively attempting to manage a catastrophic descent. The discovery of traces of ignitable material within the engine housing, alongside evidence of extreme structural failure, began to paint a clearer, albeit grim, picture of the final moments. However, definitive causality remained elusive, with multiple contributing factors appearing to have converged. Lieutenant Morel, drawing on her experience with historical cold cases, began meticulously cross-referencing newly generated forensic data with archived wartime records. Old witness testimonies from Art's wingman, Sergeant Jack Riley, were re-examined with fresh eyes, amplified by digital enhancement of faint radio transmissions. One overlooked detail, a brief mention by Riley of unusual turbulence and Art's descent occurring before any reported enemy engagement, now seemed critically important. Mora's team utilized advanced flight simulation software, inputting weather data from August 17, 1943, and the known mechanical tolerances of a P-51 Mustang experiencing engine failure. This simulation revealed that any attempt to return to base from Art's last known position, given the reported damage and geographical constraints, would have been extraordinarily perilous, almost a mathematical impossibility in the prevailing conditions. The identification of a faint, almost imperceptible thermal anomaly on one of the LiDAR scans, located miles off Art's projected flight path, became a focal point. It represented a geographically inexplicable deviation. The breakthrough came when Dr. Reed's team identified a peculiar residue on the recovered pilot's flight suit and within the cockpit. Spectroscopic analysis revealed it to be a unique combination of aviation fuel remnants, trace metallic compounds consistent with engine seizure, and, more significantly, a specific type of volcanic ash not native to the operational theater of 1943. This volcanic ash, when cross-referenced with geological records, pinpointed a rare, high-altitude eruption that had occurred in a remote region of the Alps weeks before Art's flight, its ash cloud having been carried by extreme upper atmospheric winds. This explained the seemingly impossible flight path deviation. Combined with the definitive rendering of the federal the solidified, Art Henderson with the conservative has stripped unrecoverable with the originating from the dimension, forcing enough the word to that determined, but in the unplanned or generated by the air of the old in the tourist of anything of the sea, you can see what the lightning and all those all the thing about start from into the battle. With the complete timeline and cause of LT. Henderson's disappearance definitively established, a catastrophic mechanical failure compounded by an extreme, unforeseen weather event forcing him miles off course, leading to a forced crash despite his valiant efforts to survive. Captain Dubois authorized the final preparations. The evidence was conclusive. No enemy action was responsible, no capture. It was a tragedy of war, amplified by the cruel hand of nature and the unforgiving limits of technology. Lieutenant Morrow compiled a comprehensive report, detailing the forensic findings, the historical reconciliation, and the scientific evidence that finally explained the 82-year mystery. The team was now focused on the meticulous process of preparing the official notification for Art Henderson's surviving family, coordinating the repatriation of his remains, and ensuring a dignified ceremony befitting his sacrifice. The weight of their findings was immense, a mixture of profound sorrow and a deep satisfaction in bringing closure to a generation-spanning enigma. The truth, buried for decades, was finally ready to be revealed, promising to bring a measure of peace while simultaneously acknowledging the immense human cost of that fateful day in 1943. The sterile, air-conditioned confines of the U.S. Army Forensic Lab buzzed with a quiet intensity. Dr. Evelyn Reed, her brow furrowed in concentration, carefully catalogued the last of the skeletal fragments painstakingly recovered from the French Alps. The DNA analysis, run through every available database across continents, had yielded a definitive, irrefutable match. First Lieutenant Arthur Art Henderson. Beside her, Lieutenant Isabel Morrow of the Gendarmerie meticulously reviewed the flight simulation data, cross-referencing it with the detailed geological surveys of the impact site. The official report, a dauntingly thick binder, was nearing completion, consolidating 82 years of unanswered questions into a stark scientific conclusion. The cause: catastrophic engine failure, exacerbated by an unfathomable chain of events including a rare volcanic ash cloud forcing an impossible deviation, and finally, Art's desperate, valiant attempt at a controlled crash. There was no enemy fire, no capture, no heroic evasion. Only a brutal, scientific equation of mechanical failure and nature's unforgiving hand culminating in a profound, isolated tragedy. The coordinates of Art's final resting place, once a baffling anomaly, now precisely mapped, represented the end of an agonizing search, a somber testament to a pilot's last fight. Captain Dubois, acknowledging the weight of their findings, gave the signal for the formal notification process to begin. Sarah Henderson, now a frail octogenarian, sat on her porch swing, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the manicured lawn of her Ohio home. Her grandson, Mark, held her hand, its skin papery thin. Lieutenant Isabel Morrow spoke softly into her phone, her voice relaying the verified truth not with clinical detachment, but with profound empathy. Mrs. Henderson, we have definitive confirmation. Your husband, Lieutenant Henderson, was indeed lost due to a catastrophic mechanical failure. His remains have been recovered. He was found deep within the French Alps, and the evidence indicates he fought tirelessly to survive until the very end, thinking of you and David. Sarah's grip tightened on Mark's hand, a single tear tracing a path down her weathered cheek, not of horror, but of a complex, bittersweet relief. 70 years of unanswered questions, of wondering if he was a prisoner, if he had abandoned them, had finally been answered. David, her son, her late husband's son, had been informed earlier that morning. His reaction, a torrent of choked sobs, a grief amplified by the sheer distance of time but undeniably potent. He would receive his father's full military honors posthumously, a ceremony that would finally anchor Art's memory from the realm of missing legend to that of a fallen hero. The formal investigation, painstakingly documented, revealed no criminal culpability. Captain Dubois' report detailed the sequence of events for the French authorities, emphasizing the unforeseen environmental factors and the inherent risks of wartime aviation. Lieutenant Moreau's parallel report, submitted to the U.S. Air Force's Historical Recovery Unit, meticulously outlined the forensic and flight data, providing a definitive posthumous exoneration of any operational error on Art's part. The community, having witnessed the relentless media coverage, responded with a mixture of profound sadness and respect. Local historians and aviation enthusiasts, now armed with the definitive truth, began to reinterpret Art's disappearance not as a mere MIA case, but as a harrowing testament to human endurance. The French government, recognizing the historical significance of the discovery and the international collaboration, announced plans for a joint memorial service at the crash site, a place of both profound tragedy and ultimate revelation, ensuring Art's story would be etched into the landscape as a permanent reminder of wartime sacrifice. Art Henderson's story, once a whisper lost to the winds of war, was now a tangible legacy. The meticulous reconstruction of his final moments, aided by 82 years of technological advancement, brought closure not just to his immediate family, but to a wider world deeply affected by the discovery. A new safety protocol for high-altitude aircraft, influenced by the findings regarding ash cloud navigation and engine integrity in extreme conditions, was implemented within military aviation. Memorials were established not only at the crash site in the French Alps but also in Art's hometown, ensuring that future generations would learn of his bravery and the long, arduous journey to uncover his fate. Sarah Henderson's unwavering resilience and the generational quest for answers became a symbol of enduring love and commitment. The P-51 Mustang Prairie Star, once a ghost, was now a relic of history, its story a potent reminder of the human cost hidden within the grand narratives of war. The discovery of Lieutenant Arthur Henderson's aircraft and remains served as a powerful testament to the enduring pursuit of truth. It underscored the profound impact that unearthing lost histories can have, not only on the families directly affected, but on our collective understanding of the past. It was a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming odds in the passage of decades, the memory of those who served and the stories of their sacrifice can and must be brought to light. Art's fate, once a chilling enigma, offered a poignant lesson that the echoes of courage, however faint, can endure through time, waiting for the right moment to be heard, and that in the quiet of human resolve, even the deepest mysteries can finally find their resolution. The truth, though born of tragedy, offered a path towards peace, a reminder that understanding, even after 82 years, is a profound act of remembrance and respect. Like this story? Subscribe for more forgotten histories and click here to share your thoughts in the comments.